Traders, how are you? With Marcello. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. We have the airport of Reno that's changing the airport runways because of the effect of the magnetic, not the magnetic interference. Let me look it up. I got it written down right here. The changing magnetic fields of the Earth. We have a country that's banning ATM withdrawals to try to promote their digital currency. And in addition to that, we have Tesla sales crashing, or their production, I should say, crashing over 20%, and a lot more. Let's get started. Major thing that's happening is Brazil is out of the World Cup. So let's give a moment of silence for Brazil. The overall situation that we've had, not only this week, but also in the entire year, is the increase in the interest rates from the central bank. Now, if you don't know, we have, or if you're too young to not have lived through the crisis in 2008 and 2009, we have literally been living in a bubble since 2008 and 2009. And the reason why is because governments around the world have dropped the interest rates. That creates more demand. Let's call it consumer demand. So we're talking about the prices of houses go up because it's much easier and easier. It's more accessible for people to buy them because with lower interest rates, you get to pay less a month for them, right? Demands for cars, obviously stocks go up. So we've been living in this situation where if there's more consumer demand, which is almost 70%, 70% of the economy, almost 70%, that moves the economy a lot. So now we've run into a situation where all of that money printing, because of the lower interest rates, has finally caught up with us, and we're starting to get some pretty serious inflation. You're probably seeing it at the grocery store, right? So the over-financialized economy that we live in right now is basically dependent on the interest rates, which are set by the central bank, because that obviously is going to increase or decrease the amount of consumer demand, which is about 70% of the economy, not to include things like real estate and construction, which are about 17, 18% of the economy as well, right? So we had a stronger than expected jobs report. So that puts a little bit of pressure on the central bank to continue to increase the interest rates, which is not bueno for you and I. And then the producer price data, which is the cost to produce a service or a product, was hotter than expected as well. So the indicators that the central bank uses in the United States sees these numbers and they're like, the economy's doing all right. So the more likely outcome is they're going to continue to increase the interest rates, which has a detrimental effect on the economy because it literally kind of, if the economy goes afire, they just keep putting water on it basically, and they just keep increasing the hose, if that makes sense. Overall, markets in the U.S. were mostly negative, including Canada. I did this piece of news. I didn't know where to put it, so I just put it in the beginning, that Reno's airport is making changes to the runways due to the Earth's magnetic fields changing. I don't know if you guys remember, for those of you that have been following me for a while, but the North Pole has literally been moving towards Russia. It's almost at the 40-degree mark latitude, which supposedly when it gets there, we're going to have a lot of problems, blah, blah, blah. But it's really eerie because before it kind of just moved around the same place in the Arctic, right? In the North Pole, essentially. And now it's literally just making a straight line towards Russia. So if this keeps happening, what's going to be the problem? Remember that things that we rely on every day, like GPS, for example, relies on the magnetic fields of the Earth. If you guys don't remember, there was a huge earthquake in Chile. I tried to look it up. I couldn't find it on Google. I think it was 2013, 2011, something like that. And when that earthquake happened, the runways in Tampa had to be redrawn because after the earthquake, the Earth tilted a bit on its axis, and obviously runways and airports and planes, we all rely on the magnetic fields of the Earth. So that's kind of what I was starting to discuss with you guys about in 2020, where the next 10 years, this decade, we're going to have environmental problems, social problems, economic problems, and this looks to be just the beginning. Overseas market news, the European markets mixed, almost around 1% or so. Latin America was mixed as well. Bovespa went down over 4%. Supposedly, they're fighting about the election, so that's probably not going to do too well for Brazil. Africa and the Middle East, mixed, with Egypt going up almost 9% and Saudi Arabia going down almost 6%. And in the far East, we have the Hang Seng in Hong Kong, which continues to lead each week. They went up 6.56%. Bitcoin and cryptos, Coinbase, which is the largest crypto exchange in the United States, is seeing its 2022 revenue drop by 50% compared to last year, 2021. Their shares have fallen over 80% in 2022, and the third quarter revenue this year is about 1/4, 25% of what it was last year in the third quarter. And obviously, we have the situation with the FTX collapse, the contagion risks. And this is what I always warned you guys about the crypto space, that, yeah, you can make a lot of money, but I don't think the end game is Bitcoin is the future of money. I think that the blockchain, which is the technology that the crypto uses, is the future because of the government coin, which are the CBDCs, but which I have been calling from the beginning government coin. Nigeria is banning ATM cash withdrawals to $45 per day to push digital payments. So that's probably going to come to Europe and the United States very soon too. And Bitcoin overall higher for the week, 0.86% to 16,900, blah, 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 just short of 17,000. Commodities, the oil mafia, OPEC, announced that they were going to leave the production of oil unchanged. The state of New Mexico is set to overtake the country of Mexico's crude oil production this month, and they're expecting the International Energy Agency, the United States Energy Agency, is quietly reporting, because obviously the president and the government right now is, let's all go to electric cars because it hurts the environment. The U.S. is set to produce a record high amount of oil by June 2023, breaking the previous record in 2019. ExxonMobil, due to their record quarterly earnings, they're set to increase their salaries for all their employees above the rate of inflation at 9%. Remember that the current U.S. consumer price index is at 7.7. Remember, it's a lot higher because they manipulate that number. And U.S. crude for the week absolutely collapsed. The U.S. went down over 12% to 71.02, while Brent, which is the international crude, went down just over 11.50% to 76.70. And according to Standard Chartered, which is a U.S. bank, they're saying that the markets are underpricing several scenarios this year, and they're including that Bitcoin could drop to 5,000 and gold could rally to 2250 an ounce to a record high. Obviously, it's a situation where we still have these contagion risks in crypto. FTX, if you guys don't remember, the second largest exchange in the world, collapsed just overnight, lost over $11 billion in consumer money. There's even a class action lawsuit. I started organizing notes for a video for you guys to talk about the FTX scenario. So let me know if you guys want me to do that there in the comments. China confirmed that they're buying up gold again in November. They bought 32 tons of gold, and the World Gold Council is reporting that central banks bought a record 400 tons in gold in Q3 alone. Now, what I always tell you is don't pay attention to what they say, pay attention to what they do. Now, why are central banks all of a sudden starting to buy so much gold? Remember that gold classically is money. And supposedly, even though Warren Buffett hates it, it holds its price against inflation. G7 countries are putting a price cap on Russian seaborne oil, come in force on Monday. So they're not going to pay more, supposedly not going to pay more than $60 a barrel for oil. They're going to try to limit Putin's financing arm, because obviously they're the second largest exporter of oil in the world. So they think, so I want you to open up, because I always try to do these videos so you can connect the dots. So now it's gone from sanctions of not buying oil. Remember that little switcheroo? They were saying that they're going to sanction everything in Russia, and they kept buying Russian oil, both the US and Europe. Well, now they're saying, well, let's put a cap on the oil. Let's put the cap at $60. So we're not going to pay for it. Even though we're supposed to be sanctioning it, not buying it, let's buy it for not more than $60. Obviously, Russia's not going to do that. And one of the things that is extremely interesting is that if they eventually, Russia especially, if they eventually launch a system where they're going to receive gold for payment of oil, for example, a gram of gold for 2 barrels of crude, that could potentially collapse the Western financial system because a lot of the banks in the US and Europe are involved in the futures markets, which are the derivatives, which are super leveraged, and they could face a liquidity shortfall. So theoretically, Russia could win a war with the West without even firing a shot. Gold went up for the week 0.03% to just under 1,800 at 1,798. Silver has blasted to the upside over the last few weeks. They went up 1.55% to 2,356. And in financial and banking news, more than 2/3 of Americans are having a hard time affording their grocery store costs as food costs continue to soar, according to new data, and 83% are currently relying on some form of coupons or lower loyalty programs to be able to put food on the table. Investors also are starting to see inflation in Russia starting to slow at 12%. They're being affected by a lot of the sanctions. Remember, a lot of the companies pulled out of Russia. And the UK government on Friday announced extra reforms on the financial regulations that, quote, claims to overhaul the EU laws that choked off growth. This is really bad. One of the things is for them they're going to remove the requirement that forces banks to separate retail from investment arms, which means after the 2008 and 2009 crisis, right, the most of the countries around the world passed a law that was in place before, and the United States, Clinton removed that law called the Glass-Steagall Act, but where you can't take your money that you have in the bank and go and invest it somewhere. So it's like, what they're saying is, well, we're going to allow the banks now to use your savings and use it to invest it in stuff, which obviously banks at that point don't care, because remember that banks are too big to fail. And if they do fail, you lose your money, but the bank doesn't lose theirs, right? This also was implemented after the Great Depression in 1929 and the 1930s. This is not going to end well. Eventually, we're going to have a financial crisis of biblical proportions. And literally what they're doing is just continuing to kick the can down the road. Eventually, the governments of the world are going to start to lower the interest rates again, because obviously, remember that almost 70% of the economy in the United States and the majority of advanced economies around the world, it's above 50% consumer spending. And if they continue to increase interest rates, it's choking the consumer spending. Friday, U.S. producer prices rose more than expected as well, which again is another indicator that might give the central bank of the United States more firepower to continue to raise interest rates, which is not good for you and I or the economy. And the cost of financing a U.S. home ticked lower for the fourth consecutive week. The weekly average rate for a 30-year mortgage went down to 6.33%. And since World War II, this is now the second biggest home price correction since that time. So pretty significant problem for the housing market, which is roughly 18% of the economy. Inversion on the 3-month and 10-year U.S. Treasury yields are at a curve at its deepest since January 2001. Remember that when it's an indicator of a recession, because when people get scared that a recession is coming, what do they want to do? They want to be liquid. So they start to invest in more short-term bonds, like the 3-month, for example, instead of longer-term bonds, which is government debt, like the 10-year. So then the interest rate on the shorter-term debt goes up. The interest rate on the longer-term debt goes down. I should do this backwards. The longer-term debt goes down. The shorter-term debt goes up. And then that inversion between the two interest rates indicates that there's a recession. So most likely 2023. Political news. Peru suffered a coup after the President Castillo tried to dissolve the parliament. Congress didn't listen to him and they kicked him out. Now Peru has the first woman president in history, which is obviously good, but obviously not good because of the situation there. And he was a communist, by the way. Economic news. Japan's economy, now the third largest, saw a contraction of 0.8% in Q3. Transportation prices in the United States saw its, quote, sharpest rate of contraction in November ever, right? So again, remember, almost 70% is consumer spending money. If we are not buying things, it means that transportation, the demand is going down, which means that the economy is not doing well, which is another indicator that we might be walking into a lot of trouble. In corporate news, the bastards, excuse my French, at Hertz have to pay $168 million to customers accused of stealing cars after, quote unquote, a glitch. So people would rent the car and then Hertz would report you to the police saying that you stole the car even though you rented it, and people actually went to jail. So Don't use Hertz because they're a-holes. Tesla shares went down over 6% to 182.45 after they reported that the Shanghai plant is going to reduce production by 20% of their Model Y. Carvana, the used car prices have collapsed by the most on record. And now Carvana, which was the online marketplace where you ordered a car online, it showed up at your house. They are in a bankruptcy risk. Their shares went down almost 43%. And now there's reports that the biggest shareholders, the biggest creditors holding $4 billion of debt are signed a paper to agree to work together if they do go bankrupt. Campbell's Soup shares rose over 6% on Wednesday after they reported double-digit increases for sales and earnings in the last quarter. So let me get this right. Inflation is reported to be at 7-8%. They got more than 15%, which means that they're taking advantage of the inflation situation to increase their prices more than what the inflation rate is at. So if I were you, I would not be buying anything from Campbell because they're a-holes too. They say that the reason is because of inflation-driven pricing and then another blah, blah, blah that I don't believe. Technology, 3 Chinese astronauts returned to Earth on Sunday after the Shenzhou 14 spacecraft came back after a 6-month mission to China's space station. It's the first space station after the one that was launched by NASA, the ISS, and they're going to continue to habitate space over, obviously. 2 million year old DNA was identified for the first time, opening a new chapter in evolution. The first, let's call it, not history, the first record of DNA that they had went back 1 million years ago. So now they have another one that goes back 2 million years. And I would highly recommend that you guys watch Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix from Graham Hancock because he talks about a lot of the ancient civilizations that they don't teach us in school, which is really good. And a team of chemical engineers at MIT have manufactured a new material that they claim is sturdier than steel and light as plastic. It's 2-dimensional polymers that basically they create them into sheets, and they say that they could also be mass generated. So imagine being able to fly in a plane or a helicopter that weighs a fraction of what it does now. International events, Chinese authorities are easing the COVID testing requirements. So now they don't require them to go into all public venues, but they are still requiring them in restaurant, bars, and nursing homes. New York is trying to bring back the mask mandate as well. So if you haven't moved to Florida yet, you probably should, because that's where the freedom is still at. And in unusual facts this week, North Carolina residents in Essential County are experiencing the second night of freezing after a substation was attacked, an electric substation. 40,000 homes are now out of power, and even schools were stopped. And this is the kind of thing I think we're going to start seeing more and more frequently. If you guys remember, I also reported how there were internet cables cut as well in the middle of the ocean. That's the news for this week, guys. Remember, don't forget to subscribe, leave your questions with hashtag AskMarcello, and remember, the preppers were right.